Saturday, October 23rd, 2077. Early in the morning, the sole survivor wakes up to shave. People go about their weekend activities. Residents of Jamaica Plain have a picnic near Town Hall. Commuters wait patiently for the subways to arrive. Nuka-Cola unveils Nuka-Cola Quantum for the first time at Nuka World. And 82 students from the Early Dawn Elementary School step off their Cityliner bus to explore Lamplight Caverns as part of a school field trip. But this was not a normal day, for on this day, the world ended.
Confirmed reports, I repeat, confirmed reports of nuclear detonations in New York and Pennsylvania. My God.
The switchboard used to be the secret base of operations for the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States. Inside, many terminals are still active, one of which has a DEFCON, or Defense Condition Status, for 2077. At midnight, the commander of the United States Pacific Fleet reported sightings of 3 unidentified submersible vehicles off the coast of California. At 3:37 in the morning, the United States Air Force spotted a squadron of airplanes, possibly Chinese, at high altitude off the Bering Strait. At 9:13 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time, the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System, IONS, reported 4 launches of ballistic missiles. 4 minutes later, at 9:17 in the morning, NORAD confirmed birds in the air. And at 9:26 in the morning, the President of the United States of America activated Response Scenario MXCN-91. They've fired their nuclear arsenal. We know as much because if we visit Fort Constantine in Fallout 3, we find the Fort Constantine launch codes inside a safe. The launch codes were part of the Minuteman 11 launch protocol to be used in the Response Scenario MXCN-91. ICBM nuclear response. Once we get these command codes, we can go deeper into the facility where we find a terminal that we can activate to fire nukes at China. Thankfully, when we try, this results in a failure. We get an error message, targeting navigation corrupted. I presume that this targeting navigation was destroyed or corrupted by the Chinese after they dropped their bombs. Now, in the switchboard terminal entries, we only see a record of a few nukes. Surely it would have taken more than 4 to devastate the entire nation, and indeed there were more than 4. If we head on over to Black Mountain in the Mojave Wasteland, we learn from a terminal that Black Mountain served as a communications relay for the United States military. We find 4 logs here, none of which are dated, and one which is surprisingly missing. Log 673 is gone. But in 672, the operators mention picking up a lot of activity from China's satellite network, our first indication that they're planning something. And then in 674, we find a log that must have been written on October 23rd. Oh my God, it's actually happening. We have readings across the board of launches happening everywhere. They must have thrown everything they had, and it looks like we didn't hold back either. The computer says we have 2 minutes until the first missile drops. The following entries here were made after the bombs dropped, and we can see the effects the radiation had on the authors. We'll learn at the very end that when the super mutant named Marcus moved in here, one of the first things he had to do was clear away all of their bodies. So China clearly attacked the United States. And from the switchboard entries, we learned that they did attack from the skies, but also that they had stealth submarines, one of which we can explore just off the coast of Boston. Here we find the Yangtze nuclear-powered submarine from the Chinese Navy. When we go inside, we meet Captain Zhao, who was turned into a ghoul. He's been waiting here for 200 years.
Have you been here for 200 years?
It has been that long. 是的, yes. I suppose it has. Long ago, just after the fire, Yangtze struck our mine. My Qianting barely made it here into harbor. City already in ruins by then. Few noticed us. Fewer cared. Too much Tongku.
The Yangtze was likely one of China's many stealth submarines that the United States didn't even know about. When we explore deeper into the submarine, we find the very room where Zhao launched nukes at Boston. In this room, we see 6 missile launch tubes. 5 of them are closed, but 1 is still open. This nuke must have jammed when Zhao tried to fire it, and inside we find a still active nuclear warhead. But just because this submarine only launched 5 nukes, and just because the switchboard only detected 4 probable launches, does not mean that there were not more. Zhao told us that he had launched his nukes and was on his way back to China when he struck a mine. The only reason he's still around is because his ship was crippled. But how many other submarines were here? How many others launched their payloads? And Ions only reported 4 probable launches at 9:13 in the morning. They could have missed some launches, or the Chinese could have launched even more after America's communication infrastructure was taken out by the first few bombs that dropped. We find few eyewitness accounts to the nuclear devastation of 2077, but the final one we do get comes from Roger Maxson himself. Roger Maxson was the founder of the Brotherhood of Steel. In Fallout 1, when exploring the Mariposa military base, we find the diary of Roger Maxson. He had been sent there by the United States military, whereupon he discovered that the scientists had been working on FEV. What FEV did to people disgusted him so much that he killed every scientist there, one by one. He started executing these scientists long before the nuclear apocalypse, but we do find an entry in his diary on October 23rd. Now, since the diary of Roger Maxson is important to Brotherhood history, we not only find the diary in the Mariposa military base, but we also find these archives in the Citadel. The Brotherhood made sure to retain copies. In his entry on October 23rd, "I can't believe those bastards finally did it. Damn them all to hell. They finally let the A-bombs fly. We were right in the middle of trying to pry the real story out of von Felden when we completely lost contact. I have a feeling the research center was hit hard. I don't know why, just call it a gut feeling. It seems inconceivable that we were not targeted. I'm sure China will make up for that oversight real soon." While Roger Maxson was interrogating and executing the scientists in the Mariposa military base, the bombs dropped. The big question then is, who shot first? China or America? At first glance, it seems like the answer is obvious. In Roger Maxson's memo, he says they finally dropped the bomb. And then later on, when wondering why he was not targeted, he says, "I'm sure China will make up for that oversight real soon." Clearly, Roger Maxson thought that China dropped the bombs first. The terminal entries in the switchboard are equally clear. The president only authorized scenario MXCN91 at 9:26 in the morning, 9 minutes after they confirmed birds in the air. Despite all this evidence, it's not really definitive. Every record we find uses vague language. Roger Maxson continues to say they, as does the terminal on Black Mountain. They. Who is they? Is they really China? Or could they be the United States? And on the switchboard, we only see reports of probable launches, birds in the air. But we are never told who made those launches and where those birds came from. We just assume. For after all, only China would want to strike the US, right? The Fallout Bible, written by Chris Avallone, one of the designers for Fallout 2, says, "Who struck first is unknown, and it's not even known if the bombs came from China or America." And ultimately, as far as Wastelanders are concerned, it doesn't really matter.
So they don't know who started it or who won?
You don't get it because you've never been down there. It's all gone, Tikorian. Doesn't matter who won or who started it.
But now that we've gone over the evidence, let's go over a few theories. The first is that aliens caused the war. While exploring Mothership Zeta, we come upon controls that we can activate. Activating these controls downloads an audio recording to our Pip-Boy. Now there's one audio recording that's glitched. If we listen to Alien Captive Recorded Log number 17, it sounds like silence. The only voice we can hear on it is the voice of the alien captor. But if we turn on subtitles, we see what this voice should have said. Our defenses consist of 3 battalions of light infantry, 34 pieces of field artillery, 108 armored vehicles, and 42 aerial vehicles. We have 38 ICBMs always on alert and ready to fire when the word is passed down from the White House. The codes to activate the launch sequence are... no, I can't let you. Get out of my mind. The codes are... no, I can't betray. My head, I can't. I won't. We learned that the U.S. had 38 ICBMs always on alert, ready to fire. Now it's possible that the US had more than 38. These are just the ones that were always on alert and ready to fire. They very well could have had many more as backups. And we also don't know if the aliens succeeded in getting the nuclear launch codes. However, my money would be that they did. They specialize in getting information out of their captives, and they already used their methods to get information from this guy to begin with. But why would aliens want to usher in a nuclear apocalypse? I can see a few reasons for and against. The aliens have clearly been monitoring Earth for many years, hundreds of years. We find captives on this ship going back hundreds of years before the bombs dropped. And we find a captive on this ship named Sue, who was abducted only days after the bombs dropped.
I don't have any family anymore. My mom and dad died a while ago, before I ended up here. You know, back when all the bombs dropped on everything. Yeah, it was right after that. And then me and my sister, we got pulled up here. Except, I haven't seen her in a long time.
And 200 years later, these aliens are still monitoring Earth. It could be that we are all part of some elaborate science experiment. The aliens have been abducting us for God knows how long, and they wanted to spice things up. So they got the launch codes and used them just to see what would happen. Of course, this could also be a reason for them to not use the launch codes. After all, what if detonating all of these nuclear devices exterminated humanity? Suddenly they would lose out on their lab rats. They wouldn't be able to conduct their experiments anymore. Another problem we have is that you can't just use launch codes from space. As we saw in Fort Constantine, you have to have the launch codes physically in hand and activate from a specific terminal. Is it possible for these aliens to hack into a launch terminal from space and activate the launch codes? I'm not sure. Fallout technology is very Cold War. The alien explanation is certainly a possibility, but we don't know for sure. The next theory is that Vault-Tec did it. This theory comes from a number of places. For example, in Fallout 4, when we meet the Vault-Tec rep, he seems cheery enough, but there is a moment where he comes across as slightly threatening.
If you'll excuse my language, the big kaboom is... it's inevitable, I'm afraid, and coming sooner than you may think, if you catch my meaning.
How does he know that the big kaboom is inevitable? By saying, if you catch my drift? Is he admitting that he knows when the bombs are gonna drop? One could say, well, this doesn't make sense, because he wasn't allowed into a vault. We find him 200 years later and he has suffered from radiation poisoning just like all other ghouls. But we also find him at the entrance to Vault 111, arguing with the guards there, almost as if he expected to be let in. What if Vault-Tec had told the representatives that working for Vault-Tec automatically got you a spot in a vault? He clearly didn't know the experiments that were going on there, otherwise he might not have wanted in. I think the fact that we see him as a ghoul 200 years later doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't know what was going to happen. Another piece of evidence comes from the Fallout film treatment, written by Brent Friedman, just after the success of Fallout 1 and before the release of Fallout 2. For a time, Interplay toyed with the idea of making a Fallout movie, but it didn't get very far. The story only got to the treatment phase, which is right before being turned into a script. In this treatment, we learn that towards the end of the movie, the hero of the movie, named Max, finally learns who dropped the bombs. Our hero asks how the war started and is shocked to learn that it wasn't China or North Korea or India that fired the first strike. The first nuclear bomb was launched by the creator of the vaults, a zealot businessman who wanted to fulfill his own prophecy of world annihilation. Now we must remember to take this with a grain of salt, because the Fallout movie was never made. This film treatment is not canon. And I'm glad it's not canon. I'm pretty pleased this movie never came to be. There's a lot of really weird stuff in this treatment. We learn that Max, the hero, is tempted by semi-mutated women, all trying to get their hands on his pristine bodily fluids. What? There's a scene where one female officer has never met a man like Max the hero before, and she offers her body to Max because she doesn't want to die a virgin. And it's been a while for Max. Right. But thinking about it, this does make a lot of sense. The author of this script tried to make it seem like the maker of the vaults was just one guy who was drunk with power and wanted to fulfill his company's own prophecy of a nuclear apocalypse. I think a much more likely scenario would be that Vault-Tec, run as a bureaucracy, would want to make the most profitable decisions for the company. We learned from the news broadcaster at the beginning of the game that Vault-Tec is making a whole lot of money.
Turning to economic news of the day, Vault-Tec stock continues to rise as tensions with China reach an all-time high.
Vault-Tec is clearly pushing their vaults very hard. They have door-to-door salesmen preaching doom and gloom just to get people into their vaults. It could be that Vault-Tec ended the world by accident. Perhaps they underestimated America and China's reaction to only 1 or 2 missiles being launched. Perhaps they thought that they would use their military contacts to launch a few missiles, nuke a few small cities, and that would be enough to get everyone so scared that they would rush to the vaults and purchase a spot. Maybe they did the math, and this would have been the most profitable outcome for them. But then again, this argument is also a good one for why Vault-Tec wouldn't want to destroy the world. After all, they're already profitable. Vaults are filling up all over the world. Their stocks continue to rise. Why would they want to mess with that? Why would they want to do anything that could put that at risk? Now, while making this video, I stumbled upon a fan theory that I had not heard before. I can't take credit for this. This theory was laid out in a blog post by author Kevin Muzilis, first on his blog The Resistance is Dead, and later on The Escapist magazine. His theory is that the bombs were first launched by Pam. This theory relies heavily on Fallout's tendency to refer to other books, pieces of music, games, and movies in their lore. One of the most striking examples of this is when playing Fallout 2, we find a self-aware supercomputer named Skynet. Skynet, of course, is the name of the AI gone rogue in the Terminator series. Fallout included this as a bit of an Easter egg for Terminator fans. In the Terminator series, Skynet made war upon humanity in the interest of self-preservation after humanity became concerned that Skynet was becoming too powerful. Indeed, the Skynet we find in Fallout 2 is an incredibly dangerous robot. We can turn him into a companion, but he's just as likely to kill us. Of course, Skynet is not the only self-aware AI in the Fallout universe, as those who have completed Fallout 3 will be able to tell you, but also in Fallout 2, we find a self-aware supercomputer in the Brotherhood of Steel bunker named Ace. When talking to this computer, we not only learn that he is self-aware, but also that he's depressed because he's lonely. He says that many self-aware artificial intelligences get depressed and sometimes commit suicide. Others get so bored that they'll create situations in the outside world for their own amusement. But he ends by saying, "It is theorized by some that this was the cause of the war that nearly destroyed mankind." Is this confirmation that the bombs were launched by bored, self-aware artificial intelligence? Bringing this back to Pam, like Skynet before her, the Defense Intelligence Agency put her in a mobile body. We find transcripts of the scientists working on her AI going back many years. But in January of 2077, we learned that they put her in a mobile Assaultron body. After she boots up, one scientist says, "She's actually in there. I can't believe we're doing this." At the end, they ask her some questions, and she says, "DEFCON is currently at 3. The odds of the alert state increasing this month are 12%. In order to increase global stability, a diverse set of detailed strategies must be adopted." The scientists end by saying, "I'll let the general know that Pam is mobile." But when compared to Skynet and Ace, Pam isn't that intimidating. After all, we meet Mr. Handys that appear to be more self-aware than Pam. Was she self-aware before the bombs dropped? Could she have even made her own decision to drop the bombs? Well, nothing tells us for sure, but in one of these transcripts, we see the scientists talking with one of the military brass. The officer wants confirmation on whether or not China has stealth subs. Pam doesn't give him a direct answer because she says there's not enough data, and she doesn't want to give him a guess. The scientist apologizes on behalf of Pam, saying, "We're working on some of her glitches." Pam, well, she gets real stubborn when she's doing too much guesswork. The officer says, "Stubborn? She's just a machine." And the scientist responds, "Sir, with each new version, well, she's getting quirky." Could this be evidence that Pam was self-aware? But if she was, for what reasons could she have started the apocalypse? Well, we learn from talking with Pam that she doesn't like too many unknown variables. When we question her in the railroad headquarters, she often gives us vague or non-concrete answers simply because she can't predict the seeming randomness caused by the human variable.
You see the future.
That is this unit's primary goal. Caution. Biological life forms behave erratically, unpredictably. All output subject to an extremely high margin of error.
Just how inaccurate are you?
The smaller the group, and the greater the time frame, the less accurate I become. But all predictions are affected by the human element.
Perhaps Pam wanted to annihilate mankind simply to make variables more predictable, which would allow her to do her primary function more reliably. If this is true, then the apocalypse was caused by a calculator who just wanted to calculate better. This is an interesting and compelling theory, but it does have its own issues. The first is that Pam was a predictive analytics machine. Her job was to predict the Chinese movements. In order to even launch these nukes, Pam would have to have the nuclear launch codes, or be connected to a network that was also connected to a terminal that had those nuclear launch codes. Even though she is mobile, when the railroad found her, they found her at the switchboard, which is far away from Sentinel Site Prescott, or places like Fort Constantine, which were used to launch nuclear warheads. Because of this, I think it's unlikely that a mobile Pam, disconnected from any network and designed for a completely different purpose, could have launched the attacks, even if she did become self-aware and had the desire to do so. So where does this leave us? Who really dropped the bombs that fateful day? Well, ultimately, we don't know. And I'm glad we don't know. I think the lessons of Fallout are less about who to blame for this nuclear wasteland, and more about how people work with each other, respond to each other, the great dramas that play out between people. But if I had to guess, I would say that if anybody launched first, it would have to be China. China, by 2077, was losing the war. They invaded Anchorage, but were repelled by the United States. The US came up with the T-51B suits of power armor, which terrified the Chinese. We learned from the terminals at Fort Strong that Chinese soldiers simply surrendered when they saw US servicemen approaching in suits of power armor. The Chinese didn't have an ace in the hole like power armor. Sure, they were good at espionage. They had stealth subs, they had stealth suits, they had infiltrated America with lots of covert surveillance bases, but in terms of sheer military strength, they didn't have anything like power armor, that could match the United States. The US chased them out of Anchorage. The US followed them back to mainland China. The Chinese felt the heat. They were scared. If anyone had a reason to end the world, it was China. Their world was about to end anyway. After all, what could be worse than defeat at the hands of Americans? I believe the best explanation is that the Chinese dropped the bombs when they felt that they were losing the war. The US retaliated, which ushered in a global apocalypse. But those are just my thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. I've laid out as much evidence as I could find, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Who do you really think was the first to drop the nukes on October 23rd, 2077? Which of these theories do you think is most plausible? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I've got a new shirt in the shop, folks. Suspender set to maximum stun. That's right, this is a quote from my weekly show, Scotch and Smoke Rings. On the front, you've got the quote, and on the back, you've got my smiling mug. You can find the design in a variety of shirt styles and colors. I've got a link to the shop in the description below, or you can click here. Thanks for watching, everybody. I publish a new Fallout video 6 days a week on a wide range of topics spanning all of the games. If you want to make sure that you don't miss my next video, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I typically take Sundays off, which means I don't have videos on Monday, but as you can see, I had a video today. So instead, I'm taking today off, which means I won't have a video for you tomorrow. But never fear, we will be back with our regularly scheduled program Wednesday morning. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you bright and early Wednesday morning with a brand new video.